My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me she'd sold the lake house out from under me and that I had until Friday to get my things out before the new owners started tearing it down. "It's done, Dad," she said. "The way you'd tell a stranger their parking meter had expired. The closing already happened. Brandon and I are flying out to Scottsdale this weekend to look at houses, so we won't be around to help you move. Use the spare key under the planter to lock up when you go. Bye." She hung up before I could say a word. I stood there in the kitchen with the coffee going cold in my hand, looking out the window at Black Pine Lake the way I'd looked at it every single morning for 31 years, and I said to the empty room, in a voice so quiet only the old refrigerator could have heard it, "You forgot one thing, sweetheart." Because if she'd stayed on the line one more second, she'd have asked me what I meant, and I'd have had to tell her that the house she just sold for $1.9 million was never hers to sell, and she'd have laughed and called me a confused old man who didn't understand his own affairs. So it was better, really, that she hung up. It gave me time. Before I tell you how I let my own daughter walk straight off a cliff she built with her own 2 hands, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from today. And if you believe that the people who are supposed to love you the most shouldn't be the ones who rob you blind, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps an old man feel a little less alone. My name is Warren Doyle. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was a lucky man. I grew up about 40 minutes south of where I'm sitting now, in a part of Michigan where the winters are long and the people are stubborn, and a man's word still meant something. My father ran a small machine shop, and I spent my teenage years sweeping metal shavings off the floor and learning that nothing in this world comes to you that you didn't earn with your hands. I didn't go to a fancy school. I went to community college at night and worked days, and eventually I built up a business of my own, a regional supplier of industrial fasteners, the kind of company nobody ever hears about but that quietly keeps the lights on in half the factories in the Midwest. It wasn't glamorous, bolts and washers and threaded rod, but it put my daughter through college without a dime of debt, and it paid for the house on Black Pine Lake. That house. Lord, that house. My wife and I bought it in 1993. Back when lakefront property up here was still something a working man could reach if he scraped and saved. It was a wreck when we got it, a rotting cedar cabin with a sagging dock and a roof that leaked into a coffee can on the kitchen floor. But Eleanor walked through the front door, looked out at the water, and turned to me with that smile she had, the one that could have talked me into anything, and she said, "This is where we get old, Warren." And so it was. We rebuilt it over 20 years, one paycheck at a time. I poured the new foundation myself one summer with my brother before he passed. Eleanor painted every room at least twice because she could never make up her mind about the colors. We raised our daughter there in the summers, taught her to swim off that dock, watched her catch her first bluegill and cry because she felt sorry for it. There was a baby grand piano in the front room, an old Baldwin that Eleanor's father left her, and on Sunday evenings my wife would play and the whole house would fill up with sound, and the lake outside would go gold, and then purple, and then dark. I'd give every dollar I ever made to sit through one more of those evenings. Eleanor got sick 12 years ago. Pancreatic. The kind that doesn't give you much time to argue with it. And in those last months, when we both knew where things were headed, I did what a lot of fathers do. I started thinking about the after. About taxes and probate and lawyers picking the bones of everything we'd built. I had a good friend, an estate attorney named Marvin Tate, a man I'd known since we coached Little League together, and Marvin sat me down at my kitchen table and walked me through the smart way to handle the lake house. "You put it in a living trust," he told me. "You stay the trustee. You control everything, just like you do now, for as long as you're alive. When you pass, it goes straight to your daughter. No probate, no estate tax headache, clean as a whistle." He slid the paperwork across the table. "But Warren, you keep control. You don't sign that house over to anybody while you're still breathing. I've seen too many good men hand the keys to their kids out of love and end up sleeping in their cars. Promise me." I promised him. And I want you to remember that I promised him, because it's the whole point of this story. So I signed the trust. The Doyle Family Living Trust. I was the trustee, the sole trustee, the only living soul with the legal right to so much as repaint a shutter on that property. My daughter was the beneficiary, meaning the day they put me in the ground next to Eleanor, the house would pass to her free and clear. I told her about it in a general way a few weeks after the funeral. I said, "Someday, the lake house is yours, honey. It's all set up. You don't have to worry about anything." I think now that was the worst sentence I ever said to her. Because somewhere in her mind, "someday it's yours" turned into, "it's basically yours already," and the only thing standing between her and it was me, still inconveniently alive. I didn't see it at first. Grief makes you blind to a lot of things. My daughter was good to me in that first year. She'd drive up on weekends with my son-in-law, and we'd sit on the deck, and I'd almost feel like a family again. But money has a way of poisoning a well slowly, one drop at a time. My son-in-law, Brandon, was a man who always had a deal cooking. When I first met him, I thought ambition was a fine thing in a young man. By the time he'd been married to my daughter for 10 years, I understood that there's a difference between ambition and the simple inability to ever be satisfied with what you have. He bought a car dealership with money I'll never know the source of, ran it into the ground inside 3 years, then opened a concept restaurant in Chicago that hemorrhaged cash like a stuck pig. Every Thanksgiving, the cars in the driveway got more expensive and the conversation got more strained. And every so often, my daughter would call me, her voice all sweet and small, the way it was when she was 9 and wanted a later bedtime, and she'd ask if I could help them out. Just this once. Just until things turned around. I'm ashamed to tell you how much money I gave them over those years. I told myself it was love. I told myself a father helps his children. The truth is I was buying their visits, and I knew it, and I did it anyway. $40,000 for the dealership. $60,000 when the restaurant's walk-in cooler died. $22,000 for my granddaughter's first year of college, which is the only one of those checks I'll never regret. By my best count, I handed them somewhere north of $300,000 across a decade, and I never once heard the word repay cross either of their lips. It was my granddaughter, actually, who first told me something was wrong. My granddaughter is the one bright thing in all of this. She's 20 now, a sweet, sharp girl who looks so much like my Eleanor, it sometimes stops my heart. She'd call me on her own, not because she wanted anything, just to talk. And last spring she said, kind of careful, "Grandpa, did Mom ask you about the lake house? Like, about the paperwork on it?" I said no. Why? And she got quiet and said, "No why." And she got quiet and said, "No reason." Forget I said anything. But I didn't forget. I'm an old fool, but I'm not a complete one. About a month later, I got a call from a realtor. This woman, very chipper, said she was following up on the Black Pine listing and wanted to schedule a final walkthrough with the buyers. I told her she had the wrong number. There was no listing. She paused and then, in this confused voice, read me the address. My address. My house. She said it had been listed 3 weeks prior, that there was an accepted offer, that the closing was scheduled for the end of the month. She said the seller of record was my daughter. I want to tell you that I exploded. That I drove straight to my daughter's house and put my fist through a wall. I didn't. Something colder than anger came over me. I sat back down in Eleanor's chair by the window, and I looked out at the water, and I thought about Marvin Tate at my kitchen table 12 years ago saying, "You keep control, Warren. Promise me." And I started to smile because I realized that my daughter, in all her cleverness, had made one catastrophic mistake. She didn't own the house. She couldn't sell what she didn't own. So how exactly was there a buyer and a closing and a realtor calling me about a final walkthrough? I thanked the realtor very politely, told her there'd been a misunderstanding I needed to sort out on my end, and hung up. Then I called Marvin Tate. Marvin's mostly retired now, plays a lot of bad golf. But when I told him what was happening, I heard the old lawyer wake up in his voice. "Don't do anything," he said. "Don't call her. Don't tip your hand. Come to my office tomorrow and bring the trust binder. The original. Do you still have it?" I told him it was in the fireproof box in my closet where it had sat for 12 years. "Good," he said. "Bring it. And Warren, let her keep thinking she's won. Right up until the very last minute, it'll be worth it." The next morning I learned exactly how my daughter had pulled it off. And I learned that what she'd done wasn't just cruel. It was a felony. Marvin laid it out for me across his desk, the same desk we'd sat at 12 years before. Somewhere along the way, my daughter had gotten her hands on a quitclaim deed, a simple one-page document that transfers property from one party to another. She'd filled it out to transfer the lake house from the Doyle Family Living Trust to herself, personally, and then she'd forged my signature on it as trustee, gotten it notarized. Marvin suspected she'd used a notary who didn't look too hard, or maybe one of Brandon's business associates, and recorded it at the county register of deeds. On paper, in the official county records, it now looked like I'd voluntarily signed my house over to my daughter 8 months ago. With that forged deed in hand, she'd listed the property, found a developer who wanted the lot, and lined up a closing. "The buyer's a builder," Marvin said, reading from a printout. "Crestline Partners, they want to scrape the cabin and put up one of those 6,000 square foot glass monstrosities for some downstater. They've already paid earnest money, $95,000 into escrow." He took off his glasses. "Warren, here's the beautiful part, and I want you to sit with it for a second. The sale is going to fail no matter what, because a forged deed conveys nothing. Legally, your daughter sold the house she never owned, but she doesn't know that the deed's no good. The title company is going to find the forgery. They always do, eventually. And when they do, the whole thing detonates. The buyer loses their deal and their 95 grand sits frozen in escrow. The buyer's lawyers come looking for the seller. And the seller, your daughter, committed forgery, uttering a false instrument and recording a fraudulent document. Those are felonies in this state. Real ones. Prison ones." I asked him what I should do. And here is where I made my choice. I could have called the title company that very afternoon and quietly killed the sale. Nobody arrested, nobody humiliated. My daughter would have just gotten a confused call saying the deal fell through, and she'd have slunk away and probably tried something else next year. But I thought about the piano. I thought about Eleanor's hands on those keys. I thought about $300,000 and a decade of being treated like a checkbook with a pulse. And I thought, no, I am not going to quietly save her from this. I'm going to let her walk all the way to the edge. "Do nothing," I told Marvin. "Let the closing happen. Let her think she's gotten away with it. Just make sure that when it falls apart, every single piece of paper is in order on our side." Marvin grinned at me like the old ball coach he used to be. "She's going to find out who she's dealing with," he said. So I waited, and while I waited, my daughter did the cruelest thing she's ever done, and I let her, because I needed her to. That Friday. The Friday she told me to be out by. I didn't leave. I sat in my own living room, in Eleanor's chair, with a cup of coffee, and at 10 in the morning a moving truck came up my gravel drive, followed by my son-in-law's ridiculous black SUV. Brandon got out first. He had on sunglasses and a sport coat that probably cost more than my first car, and he walked up to my front door and let himself in with a key I didn't know he had. He didn't knock. He looked around my living room, the room where my wife died, the room where my granddaughter took her first steps, like a man appraising a storage unit. "Warren," he said. "Not Dad. Never Dad. You were supposed to be gone." He gestured at the two big men climbing out of the truck. "Doesn't matter. Boys, start in here. Anything that looks worth something goes in the truck. The rest we'll have hauled." I stood up out of the chair. My knees aren't what they were, but I made myself stand. "This is my home," I said. "You can't do this." He lowered the sunglasses and looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Not even hatred, just contempt, like I was a stain on a carpet. "Actually, old man, it's not your home anymore. My wife sold it. It belongs to the developer now. You're trespassing." He turned to the movers. "She said the piano's the only thing worth anything. Get that first." I watched two strangers put their hands on Eleanor's Baldwin. They didn't have pads. They didn't have a dolly built for it. They just shoved it, the way you'd shove a couch, and the legs caught on the threshold of the front door and one of them snapped clean off, and the whole instrument went down on its side onto the porch boards with a sound. God, that sound. Every string crying out at once. A great broken chord. And then silence. The lid cracked. The ivory keys scattered across the porch like teeth. I made a noise I didn't know I could make. I got down on the floor on my old knees among the keys, and I picked one up. One little chip of ivory. My wife's fingers had touched 10,000 times, and I held it in my fist. Brandon didn't even look. He was on his phone. "Just leave it," he said to the movers. "It's junk. It's not worth the labor. Bag it with the rest." And here is the moment, friends. The moment I'd been waiting for without even knowing it. Because something happened to me on that floor. The grief went out of me, and the rage went out of me. And what was left was the cold, flat calm I used to feel 30 years ago across a negotiating table when the other side thought they had me and didn't. They forgot who I was. They thought I was a soft old man who fished and watched sunsets. They forgot that I built a company from a broom and a folding table, that I'd stared down banks and union reps and men twice as ruthless as my son-in-law would ever be, and that I had never once in my life lost a fight I'd actually decided to have. I stood up. I put the piano key in my shirt pocket. I dusted off my knees, and I walked to the closet by the door, took out my coat, and put it on. "Where do you think you're going?" Brandon said, half laughing. "Surprised I wasn't begging. Thought you'd put up more of a fight, Warren." I looked him dead in the eye, and I felt myself stand up straight for the first time in 12 years. "You want it?" I said. "Take it. Take all of it. I hope to God it's worth what it's about to cost you." And I walked out my own front door, down my own driveway, and I didn't look back at the lake. I got in my truck, and I drove to Marvin Tate's office, and I sat down across that old desk, and I said down across that old desk, and I said, "All right, let it close, and then let it burn." The closing happened the following Wednesday. I wasn't there, of course. I heard about it later, in pieces. The way you hear about a car wreck. My daughter and my son-in-law sat in a conference room at a title company in town, all smiles, ready to sign and collect their $1.9 million, minus the mortgage they'd taken on the place. Yes, on top of everything, they'd even mortgaged my house against the forged deed, which is its own separate fraud, but that's a story for another day. The developers people were there. Everybody had their pens out. And the title officer came in looking pale, holding a folder, and she said there was a problem. She said that in doing the final title search, the underwriter had found a recorded living trust, the Doyle family living trust, that held title to the property, and that the trust had a sole trustee, and that the trustee was not the seller. She said the deed purporting to transfer the property out of the trust to the seller appeared to have a defective notarization. She said, and Marvin told me she actually used this word in the room, out loud, that there were indications the instrument may have been fraudulent. My daughter, Marvin heard, tried to bluster through it, said it was a mistake, said she'd straighten it out, said her father was elderly and confused and had signed everything. But the developer's lawyer was already on his feet. Crestline Partners had $95,000 sitting in escrow on a deal that had just turned radioactive, and that lawyer was not a sentimental man. By the end of that week, Crestline had filed a complaint. Not a lawsuit, a complaint, with the county prosecutor. Because here's the thing my daughter, in all her scheming, never understood. When you lie to a bank and a title company and a buyer to take their money, you haven't just wronged your old father. You've committed a crime against people who have lawyers on retainer and absolutely zero reason to show you mercy. My granddaughter, my Eleanor's granddaughter, was the one who called me crying 3 weeks later to tell me they'd come for her mother. The sheriff's deputies arrested my daughter and my son-in-law on a Thursday morning, in the driveway of the rented house in Scottsdale they'd already moved into with money they didn't have. Forgery. Uttering and publishing a false instrument. Recording a fraudulent document. Obtaining money by false pretenses. Brandon caught extra charges for the mortgage fraud all on his own. I wasn't there for that either. But Marvin had a contact, and the contact described it to me, and I'd be lying if I told you I didn't listen to every word. The handcuffs. The neighbors watching. My daughter in her expensive sunglasses being put into the back of a sheriff's car while she screamed that there had been a mistake, that her father would clear this up, that I'd never let this happen to her. But I would. I did. Here's where my story turns, though, and where I have to tell you the hardest part, because some of you are going to be angry with me for it. After the arrest, Marvin came to me with another folder. "Warren," he said, "you've got an open and shut civil case here. They mortgaged your home. They cost you the use of your property for the better part of a year. They destroy personal items of immeasurable value. You can sue them into the ground. Between the criminal restitution and the civil judgment, they will be paying you back for the rest of their natural lives. Do you want me to file?" And I sat with that folder a long time. I thought about Eleanor's piano in pieces on the porch. I thought about how good it would feel to put my name on a judgment that followed my daughter into her grave. And then I thought about a little girl crying off the end of a dock because she felt sorry for a fish. "No, Marvin," I said, "don't file the civil suit." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Warren, they tried to steal nearly $2 million from you." "I know what they did," I said, "and the law is going to do to them exactly what the law does." The prosecutor doesn't need my help. The bank doesn't need my help. They're going to lose everything they have, and a good number of years they'll never get back, and they're going to do it without me standing over them. I don't need their money. I never did. And I'm not going to spend whatever years I've got left feeding on my own child's ruin. Let the law do its job. That's all the justice I want, and it's more mercy than they showed me. That was a year ago now. My daughter pled out to 2 felonies and is serving a sentence I won't repeat here because I'm not interested in your pity for her or for me. My son-in-law got more time on account of the mortgage. The lake house came back to the trust, clean, the forged deed voided, and I've moved back in. I had Eleanor's piano repaired by an old craftsman 2 towns over who told me, very gently, that it would never sound quite the same. I told him I knew. Some things you just keep anyway, broken, because of whose hands once touched them. My granddaughter spent this past summer up at the lake with me. She's got her grandmother's smile and her grandmother's stubborn streak. And one evening, she sat down at that scarred old Baldwin and picked out a song, badly, laughing the whole time, and the house filled up with sound again. And the water outside went gold, and then purple, and then dark. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a fool. I learned something on the floor of my living room that day, among the broken keys, and I'll leave you with it because it cost me too much not to pass it along. Blood doesn't make a family. Conduct does. I spent 12 years confusing the act of giving endlessly with the act of loving, and all I ever taught my daughter was that there was no bottom to what she could take from me. Real love has a spine. It has a line it will not let you cross, and when you cross it anyway, it lets you feel the full weight of what you've done, because that's the only thing that has any chance of making a person grow. I didn't save my daughter by handing her my house. I'd have only finished destroying her, letting her face what she built. That was the last and the hardest gift I had left to give. Guard your dignity, friends. You can always build another fortune. You cannot build another self-respect once you've handed it away to people who only ever valued what they could get from you. If any of this rang true to you, do an old man a kindness and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me down in the comments, have you ever had to let someone you love hit the bottom because saving them one more time would only have buried you both? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves out there. The piano key is still in my shirt pocket. I move it from one shirt to the next every morning. This little chip of ivory my wife's fingers wore smooth over 30 years. And I keep it there because it reminds me of the exact moment everything turned. I was on my knees on that porch, and I understood for the first time that I had built my daughter's cruelty myself, one check at a time. That's the part nobody wants to hear. My daughter didn't become a person who would forge my signature out of nowhere. She became that person because for 10 years, I taught her there was no floor under what she could take from me. Every time I wrote a check to bail out Brandon's failures, I wasn't being kind. I was telling her, plainly, that my love had no edges and no consequences. A person who's never once been told no will eventually decide that everything they want is already theirs and that you're just standing in the way of it. The forged deed wasn't the beginning of anything. It was the harvest of a seed I'd been watering for a decade. What saved me wasn't luck. It was a quiet promise I made at my kitchen table years ago, when Marvin told me to keep control of that house no matter how much I loved my children. I almost didn't listen. Loving them so badly made me want to hand them everything right then. But for once, I thought past the feeling to the years that would come after. And that single decision to keep title in the trust is the only reason I'm sitting in my own living room tonight, instead of in a motel. And then there was the hardest part, the part that took more out of me than the rest of it combined. When Marvin laid that civil suit in front of me, every cell in my body wanted to sign it and bury my daughter under it. Saying no to that was not softness. It took everything I had to let the law do its work and not pile my own rage on top of it to want her to face what she'd done without needing to feed on the wreckage of her. That restraint cost me more than the house ever could have. So if you take anything from an old man who got robbed by the daughter he raised, take this. Be the kind of person whose word has weight and whose generosity has limits, because love without a backbone just makes cowards and thieves out of the people you die for. Think one move further than your feelings tell you to. And when the moment comes that breaks your heart, find the strength to do the right hard thing instead of the satisfying cruel one. I lost the piano's true sound. I did not lose myself.